Good Vach, Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house as we start this week off with the bang? Bill in mid-Missouri, Paul in the great Northwest Shandor, in the Bronx, Melissa in Great Neck, Dolores in Tennessee, a new name. Welcome, Dolores. Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Bella in Florida, Barbara in Sundance, Wyoming. Welcome, Barbara. Great to have you with us. Ella on the YouTube side says Shalom. Marie saying Shavua Tov. Welcome, everybody. Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida. Continuing our journey into Bava Metzia. Our daf today is Daf Gimel, page 3. Here, chapter 1, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1. We open famously this tractate with two people are holding a garment, a talis, right? Now that's the word we use for a prayer shawl, but they're holding a garment that is a four-cornered garment. That's why it has fringes on it. And each one says, I found it, and it is all mine, right? So in that case, what do? We divide it, but they each have to take an oath. They swear an oath that no less than half of this garment is mine, and then we divide it. So now we're continuing our discussion of this Mishnah, and the Gemara suggests, and we're just a couple paragraphs from the top of page 3a, let us suggest that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. As if you say that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, doesn't he say that a case cannot be decided in a manner in which there is no deterrent for one taking a false claim to court? Now we're going to discuss that a little further on page 37a of this tractate, but in summary, he says this with regard to a case where two people deposited money with the same person, and one deposited 100 dinars and the other one deposited 200. And the bailey, the custodian, right, the caretaker of the money, forgot which of them deposited the 100 and which one deposited the 200. Subsequently, each one claimed that he deposited the larger sum and was prepared to take an oath to that effect. So the rabbis say that each should receive the smaller sum, right? So at the very least, each of them is entitled to 100 dinars, and what's in contention is who gets the additional 100. So the rabbis say that each should receive the 100, each should receive the smaller sum, and the remainder, very interesting ruling, should be held until Elijah the prophet prophetically resolves the uncertainty. Now, this is something we'll see from time to time in the Talmud, that there are certain questions that is beyond the capacity of mortal men to answer. We just can't get at it. No sage, no matter how wise, no matter how well read, no matter how understanding, will able to answer certain questions. And so we'll have to wait, right, until Elijah comes. Elijah comes means that the Messiah is coming, right? So Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, will come at the time of the coming of the Messiah. And at that point, right, the existence and the presence of God will be openly revealed in the world, and knowledge of God will fill the earth like water fills the sea. And at that time, we'll know the truth of things, and something like this, which just cannot be ascertained by any court, can be decided then. Right? So in other words, what they're saying is no earthly court can make a judgment. It's his word against his word. And so we're just going to take what's not in dispute is that both of them are owed 100 dinars. The additional 100, nobody knows, right? The one who received the deposit didn't issue a receipt. There weren't witnesses. He doesn't remember. These two are each saying that it's mine. One of them is telling the truth. The other one is either lying or making a mistake. But both are firmly entrenched in their positions and even willing to swear an oath about it in court. So what are we going to do? One answer is what we just split it. A different answer is we're just going to withhold that, put it in some kind of a custodial account where perhaps the interest will be used for charitable purposes, and it'll just be held there until Mashiach comes, right, as announced by Eliyahu Hanavi. And at that point, all these unanswered questions will be answered, including who gets that piece of money. And that was the majority opinion in that case. Rabbi Yosei says, if so, what did the swindler lose? Right? So the one who claims, if he's claiming falsely and knowingly falsely, that he only deposited 100 dinars, and now he's saying that I deposited 200. And according to the majority ruling, well, everyone gets 100 because they both deposited at least 100. So he has no incentive not to make this false claim because at any rate, he's going to get his own money back. So Rabbi Yosei would rule differently. He would say, rather, the entire deposit will be held in a safe place until Elijah comes. Now, that would be even worse for the innocent one, right? He deposited 200 and now he gets nothing back. So that's very difficult for him. Now, the Gemara counters, rather, what is suggested? Now, getting back to our opinion, right? So what Rabbi Yossi was saying is that there has to be some kind of a disincentive for liars, right? For people who would come to court and swear a false oath, there has to be a penalty, even in a situation where it can't be proven that he's lying, but he has to lose something even by bringing the case. Now here, where both are clinging to this garment and saying, it's mine, the other one says, no, it's mine, and I'm entitled to all of it, and both say the same thing. So do they not have any kind of disincentive to not bring a lie? So the Gemara counters, rather, what is suggested? Is it suggested that the Mishna, our Mishna about the garment, is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yosei? Since the rabbis say there, the remainder is placed in a safe place. Just the remainder is in a safe place until Elijah comes. So this case of the Mishnah concerning the garment is also comparable to the remainder in the case of the deposit, as it is uncertain to whom the entire garment belongs, and it should therefore be placed in a safe place until the matter is resolved. But we don't do that, right? We divide the garment. Either we cut it in half or we sell it and divide the proceeds. Now, the Gemara answers, what is this comparison? Granted, if you say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis there in their dispute with Rabbi Yosei, in the case of the depositors, where these 100 dinars certainly belong to only one of them, right? The remainder only belongs to one of them. And the rabbis say that it is placed in a safe place until Elijah comes. But here, in the case of the Mishnah, where there is room to say that it belongs to both of them, because it's not necessarily true that one originally had it, right? Both of them found it. They might have found it at the same time, and so it would be correct to divide it. Whereas originally when the people deposited the money with that custodian, one gave him 100 and the other gave him 200. So one of them is certainly going to be out of luck if he doesn't get his 200 back. So here, in the case of our Mishnah with the garment, where there is room to say that it belongs to both of them, even the rabbis would say that they divide it with the proviso that they take an oath. They wouldn't say we're going to hold it in a safe place until Elijah comes. But if you say that our Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, then there is a difficulty. Now consider, if there, in the case where it is certain that there are 100 dinars that belong to only one of the litigants, and there are 100 dinars that belong to the other one, and nevertheless Rabbi Yosei says that the entire sum is placed in a safe place until Elijah comes, well, here, where there is room to say that it all belongs to only one of them, all the more so is it not clear that it should be placed in a safe place until Elijah comes, as one of the claims may be entirely fraudulent. And the Gemara rejects this suggestion. You may even say that our Mishnah is also in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei. There, in the case of the deposit, there is certainly a swindler between the two depositors. By contrast, here in the case of the Mishnah, who is to say that there is a swindler? Say that both of them lifted the garment at the same time, and therefore there is no reason to penalize them by placing the garment in a safe place. Alternatively, there is room to distinguish between the cases. There, Rabbi Yosef penalizes the swindler by confiscating his deposit so that he will admit that he lied in order to receive his original deposit of 100 dinars from the Bailey. And of course, at that point, the larger depositor would get his whole 200 dinars. Here, in the case of the garment, what loss would a swindler incur that would prompt him to admit that he is lying? If the item is placed in a safe place, he loses nothing in the sense that before he found it, he had nothing. He never owned this garment before he found it. The Gemara rejects this second explanation. This distinction works out well in the case of a found item where he did not pay anything for it. Consequently, he has no incentive to admit that he lied. But we've said that our Mishnah can also apply in a case where two people bought an item. For example, if both of them paid a storekeeper, and there's only one item, right? And now who are we going to give it to? Well, both paid, right? The storekeeper shouldn't have taken money from the second one, but he did. So now they're more invested. It's not like people who found something. It's two people who have both paid for the same object. Consequently, but in a case of buying and selling, what is there to say? Both parties paid for the item and prefer to receive the item. Rather, the distinction is clearly, as we explained initially, the difference between the case of the depositors and the case of the garment is that in our Mishnah of the garment, there is no certainty that one of them is lying. Now the Gemara asks, both according to the opinion of the rabbis and according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, there, with regard to the case of a storekeeper relying on his ledger, it is unclear why the money is not held until the matter is clarified. And this is referring to a case where an employer, and we saw this yesterday, an employer tells a storekeeper to give food to the employer's laborer in lieu of his salary. And later, the storekeeper claims that he gave the food to the laborer, but the laborer claims that he did not receive it from the storekeeper. Both parties therefore claim payment from the employer. Now, as the Mishna, Tractate Shavuot 45a, teaches that this one, the storekeeper takes an oath that he gave the food to the laborer, and he receives payment from the employer. And that one, the laborer, he takes an oath that he was not given the food, and he takes his salary from the employer. The employer is going to have to pay twice, perhaps as a penalty for arranging this situation in a way that did not work out. Now, what is different in that case that we do not say, appropriate the money from the employer and place it in a safe place until Elijah comes? Apparently, we should say this because there is certainly a swindler among the litigants, since it is impossible that both the storekeeper and the laborer are telling the truth. Either the storekeeper gave him the food or he didn't, right? The storekeeper says he gave, the laborer says he didn't. Now, the sages answer in response, this is the reason that the money is not set aside until Elijah comes. Because the storekeeper can say to the employer, I carried out your agency to give the food to your laborer, and I have dealings only with you. What business do I have with the hired laborer? Even if he takes an oath to me that he did not receive the food, he is not trustworthy to me by virtue of his oath. I know what I gave him. And you, the employer, you're the one who trusted him, as you did not say to me, give him the food in the presence of witnesses. Therefore, you, the employer, are obligated to pay me. And if you have a grievance, settle it with your employee. And the hired laborer can also say to the employer, I worked for you. What relationship do I have with the storekeeper? Even if he takes an oath to me that he gave me the change, he is not trustworthy to me by virtue of his oath. Therefore, both parties take an oath and they take payment from the employer. The employer pays double. He arranged the situation. He's going to pay the price, right? If he had reason to distrust either of these people, he would have arranged for that transaction to happen in the presence of witnesses. He didn't. He misjudged either the storekeeper or the laborer. Next subject. Rabbi Chia taught a baraisa. If one says to another, I have 100 dinars in your possession that you borrowed from me and you did not repay, and the other party says, nothing of yours is in my possession, And then witnesses testify that the borrower has 50 dinars that he owes the claimant. So I'm sorry. One comes and says, I lent you 100 dinars. The other one says, I have no money of yours in my possession. And now witnesses come and say, you do have 50 dinars of his in your possession. We saw it, right? Then the borrower gives the 50 dinars. And because he's been found, right, partially liable in a claim that he initially denied, he has to take an oath about the remainder, that he did not borrow the 50 remaining dinars from him, right? Because the lender obviously doesn't have witnesses with regard to that additional sum. He says you borrowed 100. Witnesses say he borrowed 50. So now about that remaining 50, we have two people, each, he said, making claims against each other. But since the guy said, I don't know anything, and now he was found that he does owe 50, he's going to have to swear an oath about the remainder. And if he's willing to swear that oath, he will be excused from paying the remainder. And this ruling is derived via a kal v'chomer inference, which we often translate using, I guess, Bill, help me out. Is it Latin or Greek? And a fortiori inference. I want to say that's Latin, right? But the idea is, if we rule this way, in a difficult case or in a tough situation, how much more so would we rule this way in a more obvious situation? So how does that work here? The ruling is derived via kal v'chomer inference from the law that one who admits to part of a claim that is brought against him is obligated to take an oath. Latin, thank you very much. Latin for law, Greek for medicine. Very good. Okay, so let me do that again. The ruling is derived from a kal v'chomer, a fortiori inference, that the law that one who admits to part of a claim that is brought against him is obligated to take an oath that he owes no more than the amount that he admits to have borrowed. And the inference is, as the admission of one's own mouth should not carry greater than the testimony of witnesses. Since in this case, witnesses testify that he owes an amount equal to part of the claim, he is all the more so obligated to take an oath with regard to the rest of the sum. Right? So normally we already have seen, and the Torah writes that if I say you owe me $100 and you say, no, Sal, I owe you $50. So now you have admitted with your own mouth to a partial claim. And in that situation, you pay me the 50 and you swear an oath that you don't owe the remaining 50 that I have claimed that you said. The kal v'chomer is if by your own mouth you're made to swear an oath because you admitted to a partial claim, how much more so when witnesses come and establish that you owe the partial claim, that you must also swear the oath for the additional claim or the remainder of the sum. The Gemara comments, and the Tana of our Mishna also taught a similar law. In a case of two people who come to court holding a garment where this one says I found it and the other one says I found it, each litigant takes an oath and they divide the garment. And here in the case of a found item, since each litigant is holding part of the garment, it is clear to us that what is in this one's grasp is his, and what is in that one's grasp is his. And this is tantamount to witnesses testifying that part of the claim of each litigant is legitimate. They come in, each holding one end of the garment. So the judges, in a sense, are like witnesses. And, it's not like later they were saying, and I was holding the garment, and I was holding the garment. They're literally holding the garment in court. So we can say that he's got possession of half the garment, right? Each of them has possession of half the garment. We can see that. And that's why we're going to make them swear an oath about that they own no less than half. So the Gemara clarifies, for what reason is it necessary to have the kal v'chomer inference, as the admission of one's own mouth should not carry greater weight than the testimony of witnesses? Isn't the comparison to the case of an admission of part of a claim self-evident? And the Gemara answers, it is necessary so that you will not say that it is only in a case of the admission of one's own mouth that the merciful one imposes an oath upon him in accordance with the explanation of Rabbah. As Rabbah says, for what reason did the Torah say that one who admits to part of the claim must take an oath about the remainder? It is because there is a presumption that a person does not exhibit insolence by lying in the presence of his creditor, who had done him a favor by lending money to him. Now, this is interesting. The Torah says that one who admits to a partial claim must swear an oath about the rest. The Torah doesn't explain the rationale for including that law among all the laws that are written out in the Torah, right? And there are many laws that we can't understand. They're called chukim, the supra-rational laws, like the purification of one who touched a dead body through the waters of sprinkling that include the ashes of the red heifer. There's no logic to that. We do that because God said so. But sometimes the sages will look into the Torah and try to understand what is the reasoning. And here they're offering this reason. And the reason that they look into it is to say, well, this is where we'll apply this law. But in a situation where such a situation wouldn't apply, where this reasoning wouldn't apply, perhaps we don't extend the law there for this reason. So let's follow the logic. Right? As Rabbah says, for what reason did the Torah say that one who admits to part of the claim must take an oath? It is because there is a presumption that a person does not exhibit insolence, right? He's not so brazen as to lie in the presence of his creditor, right? In the presence of his creditor. And why doesn't he do that? Because the creditor had done him a favor by lending money to him. We're talking about disputes between Jews, and Jews cannot lend money to each other at interest. So if somebody lends you money, it's because they did you a favor. And are you then going to say in front of him that he's a liar? You can see why a person wouldn't be so quick to say such a thing. And this person who denies part of the claim actually would like to deny all of the debt so as to be exempt. And this fact that he does not deny all of it is because a person does not exhibit insolence in the presence of his creditor. Now we're on 3b. And in order not to exhibit insolence, this person wants to admit to the creditor with regard to all of the debt. Right? He knows he owes it, so he would admit it. Why doesn't he admit it? Because he's got a problem. And this fact that he denies owing him in part is because he reasons to himself, if I admit to him with regard to all of the debt, he will lodge a claim against me with regard to all of the debt. And right now I do not have the money to pay all of the debt. He was evading his creditor because he doesn't have the money. And he thought to himself, I will continue doing so until I have the money, and then I will pay him all of it. And this rationalization enables one, not legally, but it's what's going on in someone's head, enables one to falsely deny part of a claim. And therefore, the merciful one states, impose an oath on him in order to ensure that he will admit to him with regard to all of the debt. He's trying to say, he's like not ready to admit the whole truth because he just can't pay. But God knows what's really going on, and he created a system where this guy's going to say, look, I admit I part of it. Okay, fine. Pay the part of it, and now swear an oath that that's all you owe. And now to swear an oath in front of judges and in front of the guy who lent him the money. Is he going to be so quick to swear that false oath? No. Rather than swear an oath, he says, you know what? Fine, I owe you all of it. And he could say, listen, I just don't want to swear oaths, so I'll admit it. He's not so, he has sort of like a little bit of a saving face room. But again, as I've said many times, this kind of thing works in a society that has a certain amount of piety, a certain amount of, fear of heaven, so that people won't willy-nilly, swear an oath before God and man, and do so falsely, right? And so if you have a society or a group of people or an individual that just doesn't care what he says, then it's a little bit more problematic. Now, but in a case where the testimony of witnesses renders him liable to pay part of the debt, as one cannot offer this whole explanation of the rationalization and what's going on in the psychology of this person's mind that he would admit to part of it. He didn't admit to anything. Witnesses came and said he owes part of the claim that is being lodged against him, so we have no reason to say we know anything about his mental state, other than he said, I don't know anything, and now witnesses say you do owe part of what has been claimed against you. So in that situation, in a case of where the testimony of witnesses renders him liable to pay part of the debt, as one cannot say this explanation, since the logic we just said above applies only when it is the debtor admitting to part of the claim himself, say that he has no intention to repay the debt at all, and he is completely dishonest, and therefore the oath would be worthless. Therefore, the Baraisa teaches us that the defendant's obligation to take an oath is derived by a kal v'chomer inference, that if we make one take an oath by virtue of him admitting to partial debt, all the more so we're going to make him take an oath when witnesses come and say he owes part of the debt. That other argument is why we might not say that, but we do say that. Now the Gemara explains. And what is the explanation of this kal v'chomer inference? It should be explained as follows. If admitting to part of a claim by his own mouth, which does not render him liable to pay the money he admitted to owing, nevertheless obligates him to take an oath, with regard to the testimony of witnesses, which does render him liable to pay money, is it not logical that it should obligate him to take an oath with regard to the remaining sum? Wait. What do you mean if he admits that he owes the debt, that doesn't render him liable to pay money? How can you say that? He just admitted it. Of course it renders him liable to pay money. And the Gemara asks, but does the admission of his own mouth not render him liable to pay money? But isn't the legal status of the admission of a litigant similar to that of 100 witnesses? Of course, if he admits he owes it, he has to pay. Why would you say he doesn't have to pay? Gemara answers, what is the money that one is not liable to pay based on his own admission? It is referring to the payment of a fine. We talked about this in Bava Kama. One who is a thief or one who is a robber. Let's talk about the thief. The thief, if he gets caught, right, by the testimony of two witnesses, he has to pay what he stole and that amount again, the double payment of a thief. But if the thief comes and admits that he stole, then he only needs to make restitution of what he stole, and he doesn't pay the fine, right? So the fine you don't pay if you admit what you stole. You do pay if it's established that you stole by the testimony of witnesses. So this is referring to a fine. In all cases where the Torah imposes a fine, right, a penalty, if the defendant admits his liability voluntarily, he is not required to pay it. Therefore, the kal v'chomer inference works like this. If the admission of one's mouth, which does not render him liable to pay a fine, nevertheless renders him liable to take an oath with regard to the part of the claim to which he did not admit, then with regard to the testimony of witnesses, which does render him liable to pay a fine, is it not logical that it should render him liable to take an oath with regard to the remaining sum? Sounds good. The Gemara attempts to refute this inference. What is notable about the admission of one's mouth? It is notable in that it renders him liable to bring an offering. One who admits that he transgressed a prohibition unwittingly is obligated to bring an offering for atonement, right? If I admit, I didn't realize it was Shabbos, and I drove my car on Shabbos, if the temple were standing, then I would become liable to bring a sin offering by virtue of the fact that I violated Shabbos unwittingly, right? Unintentionally. If you do it intentionally, there's going to be other ways for you to make an atonement, but bringing a sin offering is not one of them. At any rate, if you admit that you did this unintentional sin, you committed a sin unintentionally, then you become liable to bring a sin offering. That's what a sin offering atones for. So one who admits that he transgressed a prohibition unwittingly is obligated to bring an offering for atonement. Would you say that the laws of admission apply with regard to the testimony of witnesses, which in a case where they testify that one transgressed a prohibition does not obligate him to bring an offering if he denies it, right? If witnesses come and say, hey, we saw you violate Shabbos, I say, I didn't violate Shabbos. They're like, we saw you violate Shabbos. Now, we've established the matter by the mouth of two witnesses that this guy violated Shabbos. Now, there's no death penalty here or any other kind of penalty because he wasn't warned by the witnesses before he did the thing, and then he did it anyway in the presence of the witnesses. So there's not going to be that issue. We're not talking about punishment. We're talking about being liable to bring an offering. And now it makes sense that if they establish that he committed a sin by the mouth of two witnesses, but he says, I didn't do it, that he doesn't bring a sin offering. Why does that make sense? Because what's a sin offering for? Making atonement. If this guy's not ready to admit what he did, what's going to be the value of his atonement? Nothing. An atonement has to be a free will thing that you want to make an atonement. A forced atonement is not an atonement. Now the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. La kasha, right? This idea that witnesses don't render you liable to bring an offering, but your own admission does. So this is not difficult. Rabbi Chia holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says that the testimony of witnesses does render him liable to bring an offering based on a kal v'chomer inference. As we learned in a Mishna, Tractate Karisos 11b, if two witnesses say to a person, you ate forbidden fat, so it's a part of the animal that is not kosher, you're not allowed to eat it. He says, you ate forbidden fat. And he says, I did not eat it. Rabbi Meir deems him liable to bring an offering, and the rabbis deem him exempt from bringing an offering. Rabbi Meir said to the rabbis, if two witnesses can cause a person to receive the death penalty, which is a severe penalty, can they not also cause one to receive the light penalty of having to bring an offering? The rabbi said to him, what if he would want to say, I sinned intentionally? Wouldn't he be exempt? If he did it intentionally, he's not liable to bring a sin offering because that's not the process of atonement for an intentional sin, only for an unintentional sin. Since one does not bring an offering for an intentional sin, the testimony of witnesses has no bearing in this matter, as they cannot prove that his transgression was unwitting. They just saw him do it. They don't know what his mental state was. Therefore, even if he claims that he did not sin at all, the testimony does not obligate him to bring an offering, according to the majority. Rabbi Meir would have him bring. The Gemara suggests another refutation. Rather, what is notable about the admission of one's mouth? It is notable in that it renders a robber liable to bring a guilt offering. One who admits that he robbed another is required to bring a guilt offering for atonement, whereas if witnesses testify that he robbed another, he is not obligated to bring a guilt offering. And the Gemara answers a guilt offering is the same as any other offering, about which there is a dispute between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis as to whether the testimony of witnesses renders one liable to bring an offering. I'm almost done. If you've got questions or comments, please get them in. The Gemara suggests another refutation. Rather, what is notable about the admission of one's mouth? It is notable in that it renders one who unlawfully possessed the money of another person liable to pay an additional fifth of the value of that money when he returns it of his own accord. By contrast, if witnesses testify that he unlawfully possessed the money of another person, he is not obligated to add 1/5 to his payment. And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Rabbi Chia holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Just as Rabbi Meir holds that the testimony of witnesses renders one liable to bring an offering due to a kal v'chomer inference, he also holds that testimony of witnesses renders one liable to add 1/5 via a kal v'chomer inference. And the Gemara suggests another refutation. Rather, what is notable about the admission of one's mouth? It is notable in that it is not subject to contradiction or to refutation as applies to the testimony of conspiring witnesses, as the testimony of witnesses cannot negate the admission of a litigant. Would you say the same laws with regard to witnesses who are subject to contradiction and to refutation as conspiring witnesses? In other words, if witnesses come and say that Reuven stole a sheep from Shimon's field and we saw him do it, and then two other witnesses come and say, these two witnesses that claim Reuven, that they saw Reuven stealing a sheep, They're liars, and we know they're liars because on the day they claim, and at the time they claim that they saw Reuben steal a sheep from Shimon, we saw those two witnesses in another city. At another time and place they couldn't have been where they claim to be. Those are conspiring witnesses. Conspiring witnesses, once they're proven to be conspiring witnesses, heavy penalties. First of all, they're going to get the penalty that the defendant would have gotten if, he was found guilty according to the testimony of the conspiring witnesses. And also, we're never going to believe them again about anything. Now, so we can say that any two witnesses who come and establish a matter, we can refute their testimony if they are found to be conspiring witnesses. But this doesn't apply to a defendant who admits apparently what he did, right? Then witnesses who come and say, no, he was somewhere else, he couldn't have done it. Apparently, that's not going to apply to one who makes an admission by his own mouth. So rather, Rabbi Chiya's Kal V'chomer inference is apparently derived from the law of the testimony of one witness. If the testimony of one witness, which does not render the defendant liable to pay money, we can't establish a matter of litigation by the testimony of one witness. You need two witnesses. Nevertheless, so if the testimony of one witness, which does not render the defendant liable to pay money, nevertheless does obligate him to take an oath to contradict the testimony, is it not logical that the testimony of two witnesses, which render one liable to pay money, does also obligate him to take an oath? Right? We're still trying to derive how this Kal V'chomer inference works, that one who admits personally to a partial claim, somebody claims against him, he admits to owing part of that claim, and the Torah says he has to swear an oath about the rest. And what we're trying to say is, well, that's what the Torah says about one who admits to part of a claim. Now, if witnesses come and establish that he owes part of a claim, even though he doesn't admit it, are we going to make him pay the part of the claim that the witnesses establish he owes and make him swear an oath that he doesn't owe the rest the way he would if it was by the admission of his own mouth? And we seem to be deriving that by Kal V'chomer inference because the Torah doesn't say make him swear an oath for the remainder of the claim when witnesses establish he owes part of the claim. So we're trying to get at the proof of why we are going to make him swear that oath when the partial claim is established by the testimony of witnesses. And we're in the midst of that discussion, and we'll continue tomorrow. Okay, let's see if we've got any comments or questions on today's daf. Looks like a couple from Tom. Is there a difference between an oath and a vow, a shavua and a neder? Since we've learned from previous tractates that the sages discourage making vows, is it that vows are voluntary and therefore not necessary? Right, I mean a neder, right, so where you're going to say, I will not, I'm going to take a vow that, let's say, apples are prohibited to me. Well, God allows you to eat apples, right? And now you've taken something that God permitted to you and made it prohibited to you. And your vow takes effect, right? So if you make that vow, then you have to obey it. But then if you forget or you change your mind or you regret it, this is going to cause you problems. And that's why the sages discourage taking these kinds of vows. Swearing an oath about what you did or didn't do in court, we'd rather not do it, right? We'd rather not impose an oath if we don't have to. But, it is a way that, and it's a way that the Torah describes to get at the truth in a situation where we can't get at it any other way, to make this person swear an oath. And what's interesting is even today in secular courts, right, you will make people swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? I mean, that is something that is, traditionally we've come to that situation in our secular courts because of this history from the Bible of taking an oath, right? It's not enough that you're going to tell the truth and that you be awed by the court. You have to stand up and say, I will tell the truth. Now, I think, right, lawyers tell me if I'm wrong, that it used to be you would say, I swear to God. And now you don't have to use that language, of God and religion if you don't want to. But, we're trying to get at the truth, and that's what it's all about. And Tom also says, presumably there's no paperwork documenting the debt. Exactly, and that's why we're here, right? That's why we have nothing else than he says you owe me and he says I don't owe you. It's in the absence of paper. Now, paper that wasn't signed, that was, when they made the contract, there were no witnesses to it, like an IOU that's just between the two people. I think even that kind of paper would be like just, he said versus he said. There wouldn't be, it wouldn't have any validity in the absence of it being created in the presence of witnesses. Though it might provide further evidence about state of mind, but I think at the end of the day, without witnesses, we're in a situation of these counter oral claims. So that's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Sunday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night. Have a great week. Shavua Tov.